Hello, guys. David Vose here. Well, it's a beautiful day here in Red Mesa, New Mexico. Hope you're having a wonderful day where you are. I want to get, again, right into this. I've got a lot of information that's got to somehow work its way into this, and we'll see how much we can get it in. But the man you're looking on your screen at is a man named Willard Richards. That is the man that actually pulled the trigger in Carthage jail, murdering the prophet. And here's another little bit of information you might enjoy. He was rewarded for this damnable, evil, twisted behavior by becoming, or by being appointed, one of the apostles with Brigham Young. He was a counselor to Brigham Young when this happened, and was kind of his right-hand man. Now, I'm going to tell you a lot of interesting things about this, so for you ex-Mormons or Mormons, stay tuned. You'll really enjoy knowing the truth about some of these things that you probably have wondered about. But for others, there's going to be a lot of stuff in this. It's not just about Joseph Smith and the Mormon Church and the Book of Mormon, of course. What we're really talking about is the Masons and how they became this corrupt, evil organization that we find in the world and how they took over America. So let's get started. All right, well, I want to share this with you. Wikipedia, Willard Richards. Willard Richards, born in 1804. He was about the same age as Joseph Smith. And he died in 1854. Not much longer than Joseph Smith on that end. I guess doing evil doesn't really help you all that much. Gave him an extra 10 years. Was a physician and midwife, nurse trainer, and an early leader in the Latter-day Saint movement. He served as second counselor to Church President Brigham Young. Isn't that interesting? But that's not where it ends. We're going to find out that he was baptized by Brigham Young. He went over there where Brigham Young was, to the East Coast where all the Cochranites were, and was sent to Britain on a mission for 4 years because he had to go back to headquarters because they were taken over. They were sent by the Bavarian Illuminati, Brigham Young, and his counselor. You'll also find that this guy, Willard Richards, ends up becoming an apostle and served closely with Kimball, and Kimball and Brigham Young were definitely in on all of this Cochranite stuff and were on the missions in the East and came back and took over the church and killed Joseph Smith. The evidence is clear. But by Brigham Young, once he was his second counselor, and Brigham Young made him an apostle, but they also made him the recorder and the historian and the one that would tell everybody in generations to come everything that happened in the church and all the history, and not just the information about what happened when Joseph Smith died, which he actually was the one who pulled the trigger. He was standing right by Joseph Smith. And the evidence, and I'll put a link to that video in the box below. You can all watch that. A lot of you are not Mormons. You won't want to watch it because you're not interested in exactly who killed. But I will tell you guys that you can watch it or you don't have to watch it. But if you don't watch it, just to let you know what it does say in that video, if you had watched it, is the absolute fact, complete and total proof that the bullet that killed Joseph Smith did not come from outside the jail through the door. We have all the testimonies of those who lied, and we can prove. I believe the video that I'm going to show you is proof. That man never says that because he's trying to be modest, but he explains all the other theories and shows and does experiments to prove that all of these other theories are impossible, and it's only possible that it was an inside job. That's the only thing possible. And with all the testimony and everything we know about that, what happened, it appears that everybody there was working together with Brigham Young to kill Joseph Smith that day. People inside with him that were loyal to Brigham Young, the county seat, the government, the police, everything was being rigged to stomp out. This was sent down from headquarters in Bavaria, but the governor of Missouri was involved, and sheriffs and different things too. And remember, the whole Masonic party had been taken over by Brigham Young. They came in and had all the positions of authority and power, and they did not want to see Joseph Smith run for president because they knew he was about to win. And they saw a way to use this organization that was built up to this point because of love and the Holy Spirit, and just take it over. And from this day forward, it would grow because it would be a perverted organization where men could come in and have many women. And remember, a lot of these girls they would get weren't even women. They were little girls. These were pedophiles. They were supposedly marrying little girls that were 12, 13 years old or something. As many as they wanted, and their sisters too. This was a perverted, evil, wicked organization. And, by the way, supposedly, these individuals that claim that Joseph Smith had all these wives, and they name them all, are all wives of Brigham Young. So if they had been Joseph Smith's wives, don't you think it's pretty sick that Brigham Young, after the man dies, takes all his wives? What kind of an insanity or a doctrine of anyone's church, or even if we don't even say this has anything to do with religion, if some government made up a rule where if one president dies and he's got as many women as he wants, the next president gets all his women. I mean, this doesn't make sense. But let me go on here. He served as counselor to the church president, Brigham Young, in the first presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ, or blah, blah, blah. Richards was ordained an apostle on April the 14th by Brigham Young. In 1841, he moved to Nauvoo, Illinois, to be with the body of the church. He was in Warsaw, Illinois, from September to December. He organized the medical services in Nauvoo. He was a member of the Nauvoo City Council. He was a member of the Masonic Lodge in Nauvoo. And he was made the recorder of the Nauvoo Municipal Court. He became Joseph Smith's private secretary in December of 1841 because they brought him in stealthily to gain Joseph Smith's trust. He was an actor, friends. He was made the recorder of the Nauvoo Temple. So we don't know if anything that's been recorded is even true. In December of 1842, Richards was called to be the church historian and recorder. Now, the church historian then tells you everything that happened that day. Everything we know about the situation is their skewed account coming from this Willard Richards, who was the man who was sent in there, conspired with Brigham Young and Herbert C. Kimball. Willard Richards, John Taylor, Joseph Fielding Smith, Herbert C. Kimball, and several of these individuals, I don't remember their names at the moment, were all conspirators. They were of the York Rite from the Vikings in the German hinterland that was sent there. They created the York Rite. It never existed. They made it up as a perversion and as a world takeover mechanism. They came down and infiltrated the Templars, who I don't believe had any sort of school, or, I don't think they were the Scottish Rite. I don't think they had rights. I think the York Rite was the making up of all of the rights. I think the Scottish Templars were simply knights who were there by the Lord's providence to protect liberty and freedom and justice for all, the ones who wanted the Constitution and for Liberty Bell to ring. It was the devil who was sent on their tracks. I don't believe that any of these two sides really could have fought it out. It was a stalemate. France against England. France didn't actually lose. If France had lost the war, we'd have been done. We'd all been, curtsying to the Queen, and she'd been our Lord and Savior. But since that didn't happen, it means that the French actually did win. That's why they got the Statue of Liberty, and they were the founding fathers, and they signed the Constitution. We won. But the British didn't stop. They didn't give up. They just said, well, we've got money. We'll scheme. We'll use a higher power than the ball or the gun or the powder or the cannon or whatever. We'll use the pen. We'll infiltrate the governments. We'll make laws that are stupid. They brought in the law system, the bar, the lawyers, the liars, the infiltrators, the DAs. They came from London, not from France. And it was through that, and then later on they had other ways where they made Hollywood and radio and all these inventions, and but even with all of that, they haven't taken us all over. We still got goodness in our hearts. They had to go slowly, start off with I Dream of Jeannie, a little risque, right? And work your way up to the dawn of the dead and the coming of the great apocalypse and, all this kind of evil things that were, vampire stuff, and the children's all getting mutilated, we can't say anymore. It says, as church historian, he subsequently wrote a total of 1,884 pages on the history of Smith. I wouldn't trust anything he wrote. Now, you said, well, then how are we going to know? Well, because there were many people that loved the Lord and that loved Joseph Smith that tell stories. And we know from many accounts, regardless of whether the version you've heard from the historian of the Mormons is correct, we do know the correct stuff. We just got to weed this out and use common sense and realize that these people who are conspiring to kill the prophet cannot be trusted. We don't listen to their version. And this work was later incorporated into the history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I wouldn't believe any of their books on the history of Jesus Christ. First of all, it never was the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It was the Church of Christ. In July of 1842, Richards went on a short mission to New England. That's where they got their training there by the Cochranites to become fiends, and they had seances and they would have orgies, and all of this stuff was going on over there. It was a satanic cult. That's all this is. So, let me read this. It says, Ridland's 1895 account illustrates the Cochrane connection. The information taken from historian Ridland's book in his chapter entitled The Cochrane Delusion reveals some definitive likeness between Cochranism and the Mormon Church's polygamy, including Cochrane used the term spiritual wives, just as the Utah polygamists did. 2. Cochrane claimed that permission to practice polygamy must come through revelation to the leader, just as in the Mormon Church's theology. 3. The leader's permission was required before spiritual rivalry could be practiced. Assigning of wives was practiced in both systems. Exchanging of wives was sometimes practiced by both. Oaths of secrecy were a requirement of Cochranism and are still a part of the LDS temple ordinances. And number 7, the Garden of Eden ceremony was practiced by Cochrane and is also a part of the Mormon Church's temple ceremonies, which we all know are part of the Masonic rites from the York Rite. And a simpler rite is the Scottish Rite. Nobody knows where any of these rites came from. Orson Hyde and Samuel Smith were not the only missionaries who journeyed through the Cochranite areas. And Samuel Smith had nothing to do, and he denounced polygamy, and there was never any insinuation that Orson Hyde and Samuel Smith had anything to do with it. They went up there originally just preaching, and they found this group, and they came back and said, man, these guys are crazy. So then they sent some other people up. So it says other church ministers traveled and preached throughout the region with great success during the Kirtland and Nauvoo eras. But Saco, Maine, a Cochranite stronghold, was one of the most fruitful fields for missionary work. So much so, and there were thousands of Cochranites, that a conference was held in Saco on June 13th, 1834. The following year, on August 21st, 1835, 9 of the 12 apostles met in conference at Saco, Maine. With 9 of the 12 apostles making their appearance in Saco, there is no doubt that each one of them became well acquainted with the doctrines of Cochranism, for at that time it was a popular secular and religious news topic. These evil dogmas must have made a deep impression on the apostles, for of the 12 who were in the apostolic quorum at the time of Joseph's death, at least 11 and probably 12 became polygamists. Well, friends, all of these 12 apostles had nothing to do with Joseph Smith. It's an odd thing that the original apostles were still alive, but Brigham Young disfellowshipped them and kicked them all out. We talked about Oliver Cowdery and Rigdon and others and Harris, and they never denied their testimony of Joseph Smith, the Book of Mormon, and everything else. But they never went and followed Brigham Young. So they come along while Joseph Smith's in jail and reorganized the church and sent them to these group of individuals, these Cochranites. Now, so Brigham Young had a thorough knowledge of Cochranism, for he made several missionary journeys through the Cochranite territory, from Boston to Saco, and later married Augusta Cobb, as previously noted. He attended the 1835 church conference in Saco. Brigham chose to travel alone in Cochranite territory instead of going with another elder 2 by 2, as the scripture directed. The High Council met in Kirtland on February 20th, 1834. The council also decided that Elder Brigham Young should travel alone. Why did Brigham Young insist upon traveling alone? In an area where adulterous temptations were sure to befall any lonely elder? Brigham Young continued to work in that area, and he reported that he also had been to a conference in May on August 12th, 13th, 14th, in 1836, where 52 members of the Saco branch attended, and Brigham's presence in and around Saco during the Cochranite era is another evidence that he was very familiar with the Cochranite polygamy. Well, it's much more than that. It's been documented that he had adulterous affairs with these women and that he married some of them. But here is Brigham Young's own words. While we were in England in 1839 and 1840, I think the Lord manifested to me by vision and his spirit, not to Joseph Smith, to Brigham Young, things concerning polygamy that I did not then understand. I never opened my mouth to any one concerning them until I returned to Nauvoo. Joseph had never mentioned this. There had never been a thought of it in the church, and I never knew anything about at that time, but I had this for myself, and I kept it to myself. And when I returned to home and Joseph revealed those things to me, then I understood the reflections that were upon my mind while in England. So he said he'd been thinking about it from England, and he got a revelation then. But this communication with Joseph on the subject was not until after I had told him what I understood. So he's the one who introduced it. This was in 1841. The revelation, Doctrine and Covenants 132, in the Utah Doctrine and Covenants, was given in 1843. But the doctrine was revealed before this. The statement by Brigham is very important because he admits that polygamy was not a doctrine of the church before 1839 or 40. There had never been thought of it in the church. It destroys the LDS Church's teachings that polygamy was even thought of as a church doctrine as early as 1832 in Kirtland. According to Brigham, Joseph had never mentioned polygamy as a doctrine before, and it was Brigham Young who first developed the dogma of polygamy, and that he claimed he did so by a divine manifestation by vision. And as we said, guys, this isn't just some cult. There was thousands of people, and elsewhere I found evidence that this Cochranite guy was a Mason, and there were certain rites and vows that one took in this Cochranite. It was sort of a cult from Masonry, if you understand what I mean. They were kind of raising certain people up. And we have to wonder about other organizations like Adventists and Witnesses and others. Now, in 1844, that's when Joseph Smith died. Richards was made the recorder of the Council of the 50. So from the very beginning, when they murdered Joseph Smith, they put this man in as the church historian and physician and whatever, and counselor. What we have in common with that man, Willard Richards, is we have Brigham Young, who came in at the same time and took over the church. A little bit like Judge Rutherford coming in and taking over Jehovah's Witnesses after Charles Taze Russell was mysteriously murdered in a graveyard on October the 31st. Halloween night, and a ritualistic murder. And it's a Judge Rutherford, that takes over the church in a legal way. They went to court and battled it out, and he won. Same thing happened with the Mormons. Brigham Young did not necessarily just voila take over the church. It was a court battle. And of course, the courts are run by these York, now Scottish Rite, because they took over the whole thing with all these rites. This had nothing to do with the Templars. That's what the York Rite means. It means these, if you look at the book Morals and Dogma, written by Albert Pike, who was also of the York Rite, he came in and learned these brand new, he invented the York Rite and took over Masonry. And from that point, we get these distinctions about rites. Well, the rites, they will tell you in the history books, they created them. And from that point forward, every cult you could find, the Golden Dawn or whatever, they would come up with new ones. And they always had these rites and rituals. Like Aleister Crowley, who made another one, the Eastern Temple Ordi in California. And the Skull and Bones that was put into the Yale, which was originally a college from the good guys. People like Thomas Paine. So on May 4th, 1842, Richards was one of the 9 men to whom Smith presented the endowment. Richards was incarcerated in Carthage jail with Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith, and John Taylor on June 27, 1844, when the jail was attacked by a mob and the Smiths were murdered. Okay, this is where the cover-up comes. They murdered him. Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball, both of which were apostles, one of which became the president of the church when they went to Salt Lake. And then after that, they made this guy, Willard Richards, also an apostle. And he was very important before that, because everything you know about all of this history was given to you by this man. Richards, his cousin Brigham Young, and other church elders left Nauvoo in February of 1846. So Richards is Brigham Young's cousin. Case closed. We got Willard Richards right by the prophet's side when he's murdered. And we got a man named John Taylor. Now, the evidence, as y'all know, which is down in the link, will show that it was John Taylor and Willard Richards who actually murdered the prophet. Now, isn't that a cozy situation, since, as we have found out, Willard Richards was Brigham Young's right-hand man. So who's John Taylor? He was an English-born religious leader. He's a religious leader, but he's English-born. Well, of course, because it's the English, the British, that are coming to destroy the French Templars. And he served as the 3rd president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The 3rd president. From 1880 to 1887, he is the first and so far only president of the LDS Church to have been born outside the United States. See, this guy might have been the ringleader, and maybe not Brigham Young. didn't want to look too obvious and have him become president, so he became the third president. Well, they all get to take turns, see? They're all kind of involved with this. But he was directly from Britain, from England, born in England, and came over here because he wanted to be a religious leader. Okay. His predecessor is Brigham Young. So he follows Brigham Young. He's the next president, John Taylor. So perhaps he's a little higher than Willard Richards. He became the president of the church. Now, it says Taylor was born in Millenthorpe, Westmoreland, now part of Cumbria, England, the son of James and Agnes Taylor. He was formed his schooling up to age 14. Then he served an initial apprenticeship to a cooper and later received training as a wood turner and a cabinet maker. Well, he ended up joining the Methodist Church, and his family moved to Upper Canada, present-day Ontario. Well, that's where a lot of these individuals did land originally. This was a big hubbub all around the Great Lakes, as we said. In 1830, well, he did that. So Taylor stayed in England to dispose of the family property and joined his family in Toronto in 1832. Well, they must have had quite a bit of property. He had to go dispose of it, whatever that means. He met Leonora Cannon from the Isle of Man while attending the Toronto Methodist Church. Where did we hear this Isle of Man before? This is where the Templars went after the massacre. So there were a lot of these original Templars that were so powerful. If any of them that escaped the massacre on Friday the 13th, 1307, well, they went, it's known in history, they went to the Isle of Man before they came to America. So I don't know why he went to the Isle of Man, other than I'm sure there were some very influential individuals in the Templar organization, and he probably infiltrated them there. You say, well, you're talking a lot of maybes. That's right, because that's all we got left, because they've hijacked the truth. I'm just going to show you the evidence, and it's up to you to decide. So he goes over there, just like all the rest. He comes to the Great Lakes area from the Isle of Man. He's British born, not French. Between 1834 and 1836, John and Lenora Taylor participated in a religious study group in Toronto. They discussed problems and concerns with their Methodist faith. All right, what kind of a family discusses problems and concerns with the Methodist Church? He was somebody of authority, trying to bring about change amongst the churches. He was sent in to brainwash, confuse, and bring into chaos the Christian faith from his British, York Rite, Bavarian-leaning secret society. As soon as he became a member, sent down from the British into a French-oriented liberty fraternity, trying to bring and build a New Jerusalem, he comes in, goes straight to the Isle of Man, infiltrates the Templars, gets on the boat, because they're all coming over, because Joseph Smith is sending people over to Europe to gather all of the true French liberty, I'm sure they weren't just in France. They had gone to Scotland and Ireland and probably into Britain too, the good guys. After all, they did the Magna Carta. I mean, they've been in, each of them are everywhere. The good side and the bad side are fighting, but the good side are trying to fight fair by promoting liberty and the Bible and faith and love and Magna Cartas and constitutions. Whereas the bad side can't beat them with weapons all the time. They do use that method. But in the end, they have to take away our faith. They have to infiltrate and destroy our organizations and our governments. So they invent theories like Marxism or democracy, which is a ridiculous idea. We need to follow the prophet, who is directly responsible because he loves us all like a flock and follows the rules and has been endowed with the Spirit and has the power. Like the Apostle Peter to lay on hands and heal the sick and raise the dead, as Joseph Smith did. Many people signed affidavits saying that Joseph Smith raised a man from the dead after he'd been dead 4 days and he was gangrene and he was mummified and in a coffin. Joseph Smith healed thousands of people in one day. They were all dying of some disease along the river as they were making their way to Illinois. Notice this, in 1839, Taylor and some of his fellow apostles, who do you suppose that was? Brigham Young, Willard Richards, they're all buddies. They were all in it from the beginning. And they all went on this mission to Britain. And they all were also there in the eastern countries there. In New York and Massachusetts and up in that area. They all went and served with the Cochranites for a period of time as well. But they all seem to be agents of Britain. Because Taylor and some of his fellow apostles served missions in Britain. They were there for 4 years. And Taylor preached in Liverpool and was responsible for the Mormon preaching in Ireland and the Isle of Man. I believe he went to the place called Ireland and the Isle of Man because there were lots and lots of Templars there. And they were trying to persuade them by lying and persuading them. Oh, we've got a new doctrine. You can have all the girls you want. Right? We get to have orgies and stuff. And so there were many of the original people of these ancient mysteries that followed the Christian church from France all the way down to the Fisher Kings and Mary Magdalene that did not fall for this business. But there was a group who were so evil that they took it to bind themselves with oaths. And in a secret society, they took over the church and then they took over the United States. And it wasn't just the Mormon church. They took over Jehovah's Witnesses, with Judge Rutherford making a legal battle to take the Jehovah's Witness organization over, another secret society called the Watchtower Society. So I think that Taylor might have been, along with Brigham Young, the instigator. They sent them both in, probably all three of them, and probably others. They sent them in to literally work this area around the Isle of Man in Ireland and up into Britain and in France, trying to find everybody and deceive them into thinking, yeah, Joseph Smith was a prophet, he was great, but we're going to tweak a few things. Guess what? We get to have perversion. And brought in some of the lower rungs of society. And that's all they needed. And they were all Masons, and they went to Salt Lake and built a Gothic cathedral and called it a temple, which Joseph Smith had no inclination to do. Taylor returned to Nauvoo. He served as a city councilman, a chaplain, a colonel, a newspaper editor, and a judge advocate for the Nauvoo Legion. He edited 2 newspapers in Nauvoo, the Times and Seasons and the Nauvoo Neighbor. So everything you know about the early days of Mormonism was presented to you by Willard Richards, because he was the church recorder and the historian. And this guy, John Taylor, who's in charge of the newspapers, the Times and the Season, which is a church magazine, like Jehovah's Witnesses have the Watchtower and the Awake. They all do the same thing. I don't know what the deal is, but these societies have to have their little news articles that they spread around. Jehovah's Witnesses have a whole page in the back of the Awake on the current news. And the Nauvoo Neighbor, which is, I guess, a newspaper. The Times and Season was the official organ of the Latter-day Saint Church. He was officially the assistant editor under Joseph Smith, but due to Smith also being president of the church, Taylor made most of the editorial decisions. And I suspect after Joseph Smith died, they predated a lot of things and took stuff out that they didn't want there anymore. Taylor also edited the more politically concerned Nauvoo Neighbor and the Wasp. I don't know what this Wasp is. I guess we could take a look here. But I wonder if it has something to do with the beehive, because they're really into the beehive, but they don't understand that the beehive is a constellation in astrology. It's astrotheology, and it's in the house of Cancer in the Lord's kingdom at the top of the mountain of Zion. So let's take a look at Wasp, because he was in charge of that. It was a newspaper, the Nauvoo Wasp. The Wasp ceased publication when it was replaced by John Taylor's similarly themed Nauvoo neighbor. The WASP has been described as the secular counterpart of the Latter-day Saint Church Times and Seasons. All right, whatever. Government positions. Taylor applied for and was granted United States citizenship in 1849. That same year, he was appointed an associate judge in the provisional state of Desiree. He later served in the Utah Territorial Legislature. From 1853 to 1876, Taylor was elected Speaker of the House for 5 consecutive sessions, beginning in 1857. In 1852, he wrote a small book, The Government of Deity, in which he compared and contrasted the secular and ecclesiastical political systems. From 1868 to 1870, he served as a probate judge of Utah County, Utah. He served as superintendent of schools for Utah Territory beginning in 1876. Following Brigham Young's death in 1877, the Quorum of the 12 Apostles governed the church with John Taylor as the Quorum's president. Taylor became the 3rd president of the church in 1880. Well, that's pretty interesting. But look at this. In 1882, the United States Congress enacted Edmunds Act, which declared polygamy to be a felony. Hundreds of Mormon men and women were arrested and imprisoned for continuing to practice plural marriage. Taylor had followed Brigham Young's teachings on polygamy and had at least 7 wives. At least. He is known to have fathered 34 children. Isn't that interesting? Because Joseph Smith is known to have not fathered any children but the children that he had with Emma Smith. Taylor moved into the Gardo house along with his sister, Agnes, to avoid prosecution and to avoid showing preference to any one of his families. Do you buy that, friends? I honestly, when I heard that, I thought, you know what? I wonder why he's moving in with his sister. I mean, is this guy some kind of I know a lot of you think, how dare you, Jake? Well, listen, after everything else that they're doing, with all, what, you got 7 wives? He just made this up in a prophecy, murdered a man over it. Then I wouldn't be surprised if this pedophilia wee-wah-wah didn't actually move in with his sister, just like it says. Well, in any way, by 1885, he and his counselors were forced to withdraw from public view, to live in the underground, and were frequently on the move to avoid arrest. What is he, some kind of a El Chapo? That's what it seems like, friends. He was a mafia leader. He was kind of like Al-Qaeda, Obama Bin Laden, or some sort of figure. In 1885, during his last public sermon, Taylor remarked, "I would like to obey and place myself in subjection to every law of man. What then? Am I to disobey the law of deity? Has any man the right to control my conscience or your conscience? No man has the right to do it. I have a right to, molest these little children if I want to." This is kind of the same argument that people make who want to abort their children. They have the right. Well, many viewed Mormon polygamy as religiously, socially, and politically threatening. In 1887, the U.S. Congress passed the Edmunds-Tucker Act, which abolished women's suffrage in Utah Territory, forced wives to testify against their husbands, disincorporated the LDS Church, dismantled the Perpetual Immigrating Fund Company. Wait a minute. Disincorporated the LDS Church. Dismantled the Perpetual Immigration Fund Company, abolished the Nauvoo Legion, and provided the LDS Church property in excess of $50,000 would be forfeited to the United States. So it sounds to me like the Mormon Church ended over this polygamy thing in whatever it was, 1885 or whatever year it was. For 2.5 years, Taylor presided over the church from exile. During this period, some Mormon fundamentalist groups claim that he received the 1886 revelation. Oh, they claim. Photographs of the original document exist. It restated the permanence of the new and everlasting covenant, which these fundamentalist groups consider to be a direct reference to the practice of plural marriage. The validity of the revelation is rejected by the LDS Church. Well, I bet they would, because they probably changed their mind, or else they were going to go to jail, which does not consider it to be authentic. Of course they don't. but it is used by fundamentalist groups as justification for their continued practice. I wouldn't be surprised if it is justification to practice their satanic cult, because their satanic wizard told them they could, see? So, here's the question. Did Brigham Young have an affair with another woman when he was an apostle under Joseph Smith Jr.? You'll see why that's important. Brigham Young once stated, while we were in England in 1839 and 1840, I think the Lord manifested to me by vision and his spirit things concerning polygamy that I did not then understand. I never opened my mouth to anyone concerning them until I returned to Nauvoo. Joseph had never mentioned this. There had never been a thought of it in the church that I ever knew anything about. I had this vision for myself, and I kept it to myself. And when I returned home and Joseph revealed those things to me, after, of course, he died, once Joseph had died, well, the corpse revealed it and they backdated it. Then I understood the reflections that were upon my mind while in England. What was he doing in England? And how did he get this revelation in England? But this communication with Joseph on the subject was not until after I had told him what I understood. This was in 1841. The revelation, section 132 in the Utah Doctrine and Covenants, was given in 1843, backdated. But the doctrine was revealed before this. Oh, it was revealed before. The statement by Brigham is very important because he admits that polygamy was not a doctrine of the church before 1839 or 1840. There had never been a thought of it in the church. 2, Joseph had never mentioned polygamy as a doctrine before 1841. 3, it was Brigham Young who first developed the dogma of polygamy, and that he claimed he did so by divine manifestation by a vision. And 4, this may have been his personal justification for his nefarious ways. Mormon 70 Thomas Stafford knew Brigham Young in England and Nauvoo on August 24, 1891. He wrote a letter to 70 Gomer R. Wells. I am fully convinced, as I was then, that Brigham Young was in adultery in Manchester, England, in the fall, winter, and spring of 1840 and 1841. See, this is before they made the doctrine up. Brigham Young and John Taylor and Willard Richards and these guys. The year that Joseph Smith was murdered by them. And then they made it up. I mean, Joseph Smith was supposedly in jail. They accused him of it. He swore in the Bible he had nothing to do with it. And I will show you the letters that Joseph wrote saying that Brigham Young was going to lead the church to hell, that he had nothing to do with this nefarious doctrines that they were bringing out from the devil. So Elizabeth Mayer is the person with whom Brigham was then committing adultery with. My reasons are these. We lived next door to her under the same roof. This Elizabeth Mayer had a father and a brother who were gardeners. They took their dinners as they worked a long piece from home. After they had left for work, Brigham would step into the house. She would then lock the door and pull down the blinds and the curtains, which to me was strange. Yeah, you're in another man's home with his wife and he's gone and you go in after he's leaving and they pull down the... Yeah, that's definitely strange. He never came to see our folks, although not 5 steps apart. And when he left, he was always in a hurry, and she never came to the door with him when he was leaving. What kind of gobbledygook kind of evil is this guy? Now, I just want to show you, you see where it says York? That's where the York Masonic Rite began, because they practiced it in this place called York. Now, what do you think that little dinky town or whatever would have to do with New York? Because the people that were learning this new rite, which they called the American Rite, the York Rite, the American Rite, the one that Albert Pike, another one of the conspirators, and Brigham Young brought to America and murdered the founding fathers and the prophets. And they renamed New Amsterdam New York. Well, now I want to show you where this York is in respect to Liverpool. Let's see how far that is. It's 103 miles. From York to Liverpool is 100 miles. Now, when Brigham Young and John Taylor and Willard Richards and so forth went over to Britain on their mission while Joseph Smith was being murdered and, well, persecuted, tarred and feathered, and jailed, they got out of there because the Governor Boggs was murdering them and moving them out, and they were all fleeing to Nauvoo while they were on this mission. Well, they landed in Liverpool and they went north. I'm not sure, I have to look at the exact towns they went, but they went up past Manchester. And so I don't know specifically that I can find historical records saying they went to York, but they went to this area. Let's put it that way. I want you to notice something else. The Isle of Man is right off the coast. As I said, it's between Ireland, Scotland, and England is the Isle of Man. That is where the Knights Templars originally went when they were massacred here. This little area right here was originally called Breton, and somewhere right in this area, it was a big city there called America. Now, if you go straight north from there, you go to Plymouth. And when they came over to America, they landed at Plymouth Rock. They renamed it. Well, there's this York, then, that has something to do with New York. Let's find out. The York Rite, referred to as the American Rite, is one of several rites of the Freemasonry, named for, but not practiced in York, Yorkshire, England. A rite is a series of progressive degrees that are conferred by various Masonic organizations or bodies. Well, there's no evidence the Templars had any of this. I think here we get the impression that they couldn't massacre the Knights Templars and win. They were gaining power and influence all around, even up in Britain. So up in this area in Liverpool and York and so forth, there were lots of these individuals that had fled from Britain and went there to the Isle of Man and probably then to Britain. Some of them went to America, but many of them may have been disillusioned. They didn't know what was going on. I think, look, this was a conspiracy they didn't understand. They joined a secret society. If it turned evil and started teaching them evil, some of them wouldn't even know it. But I believe then that many of them were good and decent people and knew and understood the traditions of Mary Magdalene and were probably a bit confused when everybody was going to America to see the prophet. And when they saw the prophet, they liked it. And they understood and they were taught that this was divinely appointed. And this was what they'd been waiting for. A kingdom and a constitution, a liberty and freedom, and they are all ready to go. That's why it was so easy for Joseph Smith to send these ministers or missionaries, they were all apostles, to Britain, and they just went over there and started preaching in Methodist churches all around the place and theaters and stuff, like they were the apostles themselves, and they were welcomed in the area. That's why Paul was welcomed, because the people at Corinth and Ephesus had already understood the baptism of John. So they were like, oh, teach us more. You came from the Lord Jesus? Tell us about Jesus. We only know John. Well, this is a little bit like this. The world in those days were all these men that were trying to preserve the freedom. And they knew where they came from France. They were run out and massacred in 1307, went to the Isle of Man, and then probably to Liverpool and to York. And there they were being recruited by not only Joseph Smith, but the people that Joseph Smith used to go recruit people had already been infiltrated by the the bad guys. So here was John Taylor and Brigham Young going to this hornet's nest, infiltrating the very people that Joseph Smith wanted to bring over because they were the children of Mary Magdalene in these mystery schools. But some of them succumbed to this evil lure of polygamy, and this is how they took the church. They conspired with a secret society, and that's, after Joseph Smith died, that's when they began to institute into the Templars these rites. Nobody can prove that these rites had anything to do with the original Templars. They didn't have these weird satanic secret combinations. Secret combinations meaning handshakes and secret signs and secret vows, which is what Masonry is. So you can say, well, yeah, Joseph Smith was a Mason, but it was not part of Masonry at that time. The true Masons may have been, I don't even know if they were necessarily even called that. There were different groups. George Washington's group may have been called Masons, and Freemasons may have been originally organized under the pretense that it was a good thing, but they started adding these vows and oaths, which were evil, secret combinations and handshakes. Joseph Smith knew about them and wrote it into the Book of Mormon saying it was evil. The secret societies were evil. And yet Joseph Smith was a Mason, because the Masons are not a secret society. They never were. They simply were knights charged with protecting the holy bloodline and the holy Textus Receptus and certain relics that they brought over and buried, and scriptural writings that they wanted to preserve, and libraries and constitutions and liberty and freedom. They were all about liberty and freedom. And the liberty cap that was on that statue of the Republic at Chalago, when they burned it down, they rebuilt it. They took the liberty cap off of it and put a symbol of bondage and victory over the people on that instead. We have to just look at this. If you don't want to believe this, you'll find no reason to believe it. If you're proud of being an executive at Coca-Cola and Marlboro, and also being a polygamist for the Mormon Church, you're not going to see there's anything wrong with the things that I'm showing you here. I'm not going to give you a confession here by Brigham Young. What I'm giving you is the smoking gun. So, the rite's name is derived from the city of York, where, according to one Masonic legend, the first meetings of Masons in England took place. They were probably true Masons at that time, but that's where the York rite came in to fruition. And then the Scottish rite was probably originally just the idea that there were two groups and they didn't agree. But they go back to the Templars, who didn't have rights at all. So, all right, the Templars. Templar member of the Poor Knights of Christ. Why were they called poor? They had oaths and vows of poverty. Look at this. Although the Templars were opposed by those who rejected the idea of a religious military order, and later by those who criticized their wealth and influence, they were supported by many secular and religious leaders. So they had wealth. Because, like I said, Jesus Christ's line goes back to the royal bloodlines. They were kings and queens and priests. And they literally reigned over France. The descendants of Jesus reigned. We talked about Peter Waldo, who was very wealthy. The rule of the order was modeled after the Benedictine rule, especially as understood and implemented by the Cistercians. The Knights Templar swore an oath, yes they did, they swore an oath, of poverty. But again, even that, I don't know that they swore an oath. A vow of poverty or an oath in that sense is not something like, if you don't do this, we'll rip out your bowels and, murder you and feed you to the ravens. That's not what that kind of an oath. It simply meant a promise and an order that they entered where they said, look, from now on, I'm going to concentrate on spiritual things and not military orders, or, we'll conquer them by spirit, by love. The knight's armor is a spiritual warfare with a shield of faith and all of that. It had nothing to do with a literal murdering and killing. So they swore an oath of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and renounced the world. If they had renounced the world, then how could they be getting involved in politics and trying to take over the world? Something's wrong here. Well, I could go on here and read more about this, but I think you get the point there. If you think that the original Templars were bad people, take a look at this. As for the leaders of the order, the elderly Grand Master Jacques de Molay, who had confessed under torture, retracted his confession. Geoffrey de Charnay, preceptor of Normandy, also retracted his confession and insisted on his innocence. Both men, under pressure from the king, were declared guilty of being relapsed heretics and sentenced to burn alive at the stake in Paris on 18th of March, 1314. This is after the massacre in 1307. De Molay reportedly remained defiant to the end, asking to be tied in such a way that he could face the Notre Dame Cathedral and hold his hands together in prayer. According to legend, he called out from the flames that both Pope Clement and King Philip would soon meet him before deity. His actual words were recorded on the parchment as follows: "Deity knows who is wrong and has sinned. Soon a calamity will occur to those who have condemned us to death." Clement died only a month later, and Philip died while hunting within the same year. The remaining Templars around Europe were either arrested and tried under the papal investigation, with virtually more convicted, absorbed into other Catholic military orders, or pensioned off and allowed to live out their days peacefully. By papal decree, the property of the Templars was transferred to the Knights Hospitaller, except in the kingdom of the Castile, Aragon, and Portugal. Anyway, the point is that these individuals were massacred and murdered, and they were true servants and had vows of poverty. They were not a secret society. So what did the Templars do? Well, the Templars were Latin, that is Catholic Christians. Their faith was the faith of pre-Reformation Europe, a broad church which expected believers to attend church only 3 times a year and did not expect the laity to take an active role in church services. The Templars were not educated in theology and would not have been aware or even interested in the complex theological debates that were taking place in the Latin Church in the 12th or 13th centuries. The Templars' admission ceremony instructed that new members should make their vows to deity and Our Lady, the Blessed Virgin Mary, Christ's mother. They swore to be obedient to the master of the order, to preserve their physical chastity, and live without personal property. That'd be pretty hard for old Billy the gatekeeper to do, wouldn't you think? They also promised to keep the customs of the order, to help to conquer the Holy Land of Jerusalem, never to leave the order without permission from the master, and never to be in a situation where a Christian might be wrongfully deprived of his or her possessions through their authority or advice. See, they were helping Christians, not persecuting them. They were Christians. They were welcomed into the house. I mean, think about it. They went back to Mary Magdalene and Jesus Christ. They were Christians. The bread and the water and the poor clothing of the house and much pain and suffering. What? It says, they were welcomed into the house and promised the bread and water and poor clothing of the house and much pain and suffering. They were promised much pain and suffering and poor clothing and just bread and water. That's all they were promised. Although Jacques de Vitry, Bishop of Acre, suggested that some brothers joined a military religious order to gain prestige and an easier life. The order's official line was that life would not be easy and that members could expect to sacrifice all their own interests for the sake of deity and Our Lady. Do you think that's what Masons today do? No, they don't worship deity. They got this G in the middle of this compass. You know, it's supposed to be geometry or something, is what they say they believe in. Although they formed an active rather than a praying religious order, the Templars expected to focus their lives on prayer and serving deity. Their regulations show that their daily timetable was based on the timetable of the monastic rule of St. Benedict, with prayers to be said at fixed times during the day known as the hours. If brothers could not say the hours in chapel because they were traveling on the order's business, they should recite the Lord's Prayer at the appropriate times. They should also say the Lord's Prayer when they went to bed, before and after meals, and in daily service for the members of the order and their benefactors living in the dead. Well, friends, it doesn't sound like these guys were modern Masons. But anyway, I think we'll leave it there. We're about an hour now, and man, I'm sure your head's spinning at this point. And I'm sorry we had to do that. A lot of reading, and it's probably, it was probably boring. But there are a lot of people out there that need to know the truth. If you show this to a person who's LDS and ask them to counter it or explain any of this, you might convert one. And it's important that we do convert them because, like, I just saw Glenn Beck the other day. He was interviewing this lady, and she's brilliant. And I don't remember her name, and I don't want to talk about that particular issue right now. But she is investigating the Epstein thing. I've seen this girl before. She's brilliant. And she's like, she knows all of this, but I almost get the feeling that because she's being promoted to talk about Epstein, they wouldn't promote me to do that. They won't let me talk about it. And she seems to know everything, like she's just been bred for this. And they put her out in the spotlight, and she's there, and I don't know, it just seems like everybody is just so brainwashed that they are doing things and orchestrating things, going out and beating their fellow servants, really sincerely or supposedly, like, we're so sincere, we're beating you, and we really believe we should beat you, so therefore we're probably justified. No, I don't know. I don't think so. I think they've squandered like the evil servant. But some of them really do need to know the truth or want to. And for those who want to know the truth, I think it's important to get this out there to them so they can find it, because I was searching for all of this information my entire life. It took me a while to weave my way through all of the lies to find any similitude of light at the end of the tunnel. Anyway, share this with people who need to know. I'm David Vose. I'm going to go ahead and go. I hope you have a wonderful evening. May the Lord bless you guys. We'll see you tomorrow.